All right, people, we've made it. Another finale. We are literally in the home stretch. We are just about done. Season 6, episode 10. Arguably one of, if not the biggest episode of the entire show, possibly even bigger than Battle of the Bastards, the long-awaited, coveted, named after the 6th book that still has yet to be released, if ever. Season 6 finale, The Winds of Winter. Pat, you ready to do this?
Yeah, man, Dom, I'm definitely willing to go through this. Could be called the pinnacle of the Game of Thrones show, and I think the TV family who's talking Thrones with us here today might agree that what we're about to see in season 7 and even season 8 might be the winds of something someone dealt, because we have no, it's just gonna kind of go downhill from
It's
here,
only
right?
downhill from here. All of that and more on today's episode of Talking Thrones. You know, Pat, as I sit here and I consider how many episodes of this show that we've done, as we've talked about the fact of it's like, okay, we've spent almost a little over a year now. We've covered 60 hours of this show. Like I said, this is the 60th episode overall. But man, I'm telling you, it's all worth it when you get to episodes like this. It makes all the good, all the bad, everything that we've been waiting for, all that buildup that we've been waiting for, 6 years worth of storytelling, all to get to moments like this. And it all pays off in all of the best ways possible. People, I think it's safe to say that there's a pretty good argument to be made that this is one of the best, if not the best episode of the entire show. Just start to finish, top to bottom, just a really wholesome, really complete, really just fantastic story overall. It ties up all of the threads. It gives us all the satisfying moments. It sets us up for where we're to go. Unfortunately, that kind of gets wrecked a little bit in hindsight by, the overall quality of the last 2 seasons. But I think the biggest takeaway from this episode as we review it in hindsight is that this is like, I think we could both agree, Pat, this is the show's apex right here. This is the biggest, this is the best that they were ever going to be. This is really the last time that Benioff and Weiss were really putting their all into the show, not just the technicals, but just everything involved. I don't know. What's your take on that? What do you remember about the first time you watched The Winds of Winter?
Hey, listen, I know my opening joke might have been sloppy on the delivery, and I was just brute forcing my way through a structure that we've set up through 6 seasons of this show, where I feel compelled to tell a joke based on the title of the show. But yeah, I think, in my opinion, when I watched this episode earlier on, man, I was just like amped. I was really like at the height of my energy for Game of Thrones. Like, I felt like, quite honestly, like, how could this show have not delivered in the final 2 seasons? It's one of those things where, we'll get to it, but you end on Winterfell, where they're basically like, cheering for Jon Snow to be their leader, and it's like, that's not something you would necessarily have predicted from day one. When that character goes to the wall and denounces all titles and rank and all that stuff, and we understand the Night's Watch is a lifelong commitment. But hey, it's like they resurrected him. He's in his second life, so to speak, and let's go. Like, it's him versus Cersei, and it's Daenerys is sort of the kicker. And how do you mess up this dynamic of like a fatal 3-way here? That's happening in the final 2 seasons. Like, what's going to happen? Who's going to team with who? Who's going to basically betray the other? And these are awesome questions. But hey, it's just they handle it in such a weird way. Like, there's some cool spectacle, some awesome scenes, like that come up in season 7 and 8. But ultimately, it's like the energy and the magic just fizzle out, I think, towards the end.
I remember the first moment that I watched this episode. I was just the thing that's so captivating about it is the opening sequence after you already got like this completely extravagant battle. Sapochnik and Fabian Wagner, the DP, were like, "Oh, we're not done. Oh, we got more. We got more to go with this incredible opening sequence. It slowly builds to the inevitable boom. I think it's probably one of the best instances of tension that I think I've seen on anything in my lifetime. Most certainly, considering I kind of miss. I kind of miss like the late 90s heyday of great storytelling. So I really, I'm unfortunately still in that kind of Gen Z generation that really only has like the 2000s worth of stuff to really compare them to. So this was definitely unlike really anything that I'd seen on movies and TV beforehand. A couple stats that I wanted to rattle up before we got into it.
Dom, I don't think you missed much from the 90s,
Yeah, there's a couple things.
Life with Chris, or basically Married with Children, to
We're
name a
talking
few.
TV, yeah, obviously
right,
the 2010s where TV finally came to play.
What other TV is there? The X-Files. That was a pretty good show.
Seinfeld, Friends.
Oh yeah,
Obviously,
Seinfeld.
off. That TV
Seinfeld
was
was
just
a big
starting.
thing.
Scrubs was a couple years away. There were a couple good ones that were coming out.
Yeah,
but
whatever they plastered on the TGIF lineup, and I guess Must Laugh Thursdays or some
I don't know.
weird.
You would know that.
Yeah, that was when Seinfeld was on, if I remember my television marketing correctly. It was like Must Laugh Thursday or some weird thing, and Seinfeld was one of those shows for sure.
Well, a couple stats that I wanted to rattle up before we got into this. This is Miguel Sapochnik's 4th episode that he directed, and I think that even though, again, we're comparing this to the guy who did Hard Home, Battle of the Bastards, and For Better or For Worse, both The Long Night and The Bells, we'll get to those when we get to season 8. I still think those are two very technically proficient episodes, despite, the story, the problematic story elements in both of them. But I personally think this is the absolute best that he's ever done on the show, just from top to bottom. Like the opening sequence, I mean, we'll get into that in a bit, but a couple other stats. I think that this episode is in competition with The Long Night and The Bells. I would have to go back and check specifically, but I believe this has the highest death count of named characters on the show, because just a few of the names that we lose in this episode: the High Sparrow, Marjorie Loris, and Mace Tyrell, Kevin and Lancel Lannister, Walder Frey, obviously, whom Arya kills at the Twins after the fact, pretty much like every other innocent bystander that's caught in the explosion. Tommen, obviously, we finally say goodbye to him in this episode as well. He chucks himself off the off the parapet. Grand Mace.
I love how you put it. Like he chucks himself, like he's.
I'm trying to bring light to it. It's not a fun.
Like he's Jim Carrey from Me, Myself, and Irene, and the alternative personality is dragging him out the window. Like when you say chucks himself, that's what I picture.
It's not a great way to put it, I'll admit, but I mean it's a tough scene to admit, and it's funny because there was a couple of minutes when I was rewatching the episode before. I'm like, wait a minute, did HBO Max and all of its genius cut this sequence from the episode? But no, I turned out I misremembered a certain sequencing of events. I thought that Tommen's suicide happened before Cersei was seen torturing Septa Unella, but it turns out it was the reverse actually. And I mean, that's just you want to talk about like just how technically proficient, how Sapochnik is able to apply his technical proficiency to episodes that aren't incredible battle sequences. I mean, you look at the Tommen opening you look at Tommen's suicide itself. It's like, wow, that is art. Granted, I mean, I eventually did watch the foreign film that that scene was directly pulled from, which is Lucas Zoll's 2014 film Ida. But yeah, it's still massive.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it like took Tomlin like a half hour to walk off camera. He must have like taken a shower or something. He wanted to go out with some clean underwear, and then he walks up to the window and jump. No, it was definitely longer than I remember.
Yeah,
I thought it was.
It takes a little bit. Like they're really dragging it out there.
I thought it was pretty immediate. When I from memory, like he just kind of like jumps up on the windowsill and takes a dive, but it definitely like dragged out, and I think it speaks to the pacing of this sequence, and that's definitely what this is all about. We saw the Starks and sort of their rise to victory, last episode with the Battle of the Bastards, and now you get to see Cersei's victory, and the best part about this is just how methodically thought out the sequence is, because it kind of mirrors like how methodical Cersei is as a villain of the show.
Yeah, the biggest thing about this episode, I think, that also gets it some winning points is the fact that I think that of all the episodes, like I said, where we're coming off of so many episodes where we are just kind of, the rug is just pulled out from under our characters. There's some crazy twist that comes at the character's expense. And this is the first episode, even last episode, with the surprise Deus Ex Machina factor of the Knights of the Vale. This is just an episode where it just everything that happens, everything that builds to is just so unbelievably satisfying. All the characters that we've been watching all the way up to this point over the last 6 seasons, they all finally get their victories. They all finally, reach their point of ascension. Cersei's able to defeat all of her enemies in one fell swoop. Jon is finally crowned king in the north. Daenerys finally, after 6 seasons, is finally heading to Westeros, after we've been waiting around. I love how, too, Dario kind of echoes the audience's sentiments a little bit when, Daenerys says goodbye to him. But let's get into it, man. Let's start with the opening sequence that kind of builds to Cersei's inevitable boom. I mean, this is Cersei's Michael Corleone move. She literally pulls a Michael Corleone here. I can almost, I'm almost like picturing the scene from the end of The Godfather when Michael's standing in the church while his nephew is getting baptized. You just see the look in his face as it's cross-cutting between all the other mafia dons getting murdered. You can feel this here. It does The Godfather justice. I've talked about The Godfather multiple times on all the different podcasts as being my favorite movie of all time and kind of my go-to movie when I think of like what great cinema and what good storytelling should be, because you have the first instant with Loras. I'll also give this season credit to very economical with its use of Finn Jones, considering that Finn Jones was absent for the most of this because he was off filming the first season of Iron Fist, which premiered, I believe, roughly a year later in March of 2017. I want to say was when the first season of Iron Fist played out. Or premiered on Netflix. So you have the Sparrows. They're doing their trial. Loras immediately confesses and dedicates himself to the Sparrows. Still not quite sure where the reasoning was for that one, but I'm like, okay, he's either so broken at this point that he sees this as the only means, or Marjorie has kind of clued him into something. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Nothing that we're watching here really matters ultimately in the long run, which is also kind of what makes it so interesting and so fruitful, And almost immediately, once Marjorie sees that Cersei's not there, she immediately figures out. There's only really one nitpick that I have with the sequence, and I wanted to know if you had the same one, which is where when the High Sparrow sends Lancel to go and get Cersei, and he sees the little kid running down the steps. Why do you think he chose to pursue the little kid? What did he smell? Like, oh man, that little rascal's up to something. It's kind of a little bit confusing, and then how conveniently it leads him to the wildfire. Like, I don't know. I wanted your take on that.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like when Lancel kind of exits and he sees the kid, I don't really know what makes him chase after him. It's like, what, he was kind of like timid in seeing what's going on, and
what did he recognize him as one of Qyburn's little birds? Like, what?
Yeah, well, that's not really ever explained because they're kind of hidden in the shadows, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things where Lancel's just like, oh, I got plenty of time to figure this out. And, it's also, to me, this is like the I want to just have a whole spin-off series that's based on the meetings that Cersei had to figure out the logistics of this plan, because it is so we basically want a little child to run at the front of the gate, and then we want him specifically to catch Lancel's eye, and then Lancel's going to chase after him, and then we're going to have him like stab out the back of his knees so that he can't stand, and then we're going to have him crawl. And there's going to be like a series of three or more candles that are counting down to the wildfire.
And we're going to time it so that he's going to crawl right up to the candle and try to blow it out right as it dissolves into the wildfire and blows him up. It's like...
Yeah, it's like the way that it's shot in that regard is a little too cutesy. But like, because all it does is make me think like, man, Cersei, like, had such a large amount of meetings with all the specific players involved,
which is
all
crazy
the stakeholders,
when you realize that the only people that she really would have had this meeting with are Qyburn and his little army of birds, or whoever else Qyburn has as his following, because she's not going to trust anybody else to do this. Half the people that she probably would have consulted are probably in that sept waiting for her like inevitable defeat.
Yeah, hey, listen, these medieval children apparently, if they're just given a chance at some sort of schooling, they could be doctors or lawyers or whatever, because the amount of directions they can take to make this whole thing happen.
They should be running the kingdoms at this point, because they're more efficient than like half the other people they have in positions of power.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, I guess... they're starving, and therefore they're able to, figure out that, to get food they need to do a very absurdly well accurate job at burning down the sept. It's like
I don't know.
it is amazing to me, how awesome this sequence is, and just like how all the moments are well thought out and planned, and it really does give me this sort of like the goosebumps, right? As you're watching this ominous, slow burn of a plan unfold. But there definitely are moments where it's like, if you stop and think about it for a second, like, these kids, are acting very specific. They're not skipping a beat. They're not forgetting anything. They're ferocious. It's like, I guess Varys has trained them and
Right.
trained them to be super soldiers almost,
Well, I think the
in the
biggest
Game of
example
Thrones
of that,
universe.
I think the biggest example of that as well is kind of the as you see the assassination of Grand Maester Pycelle, which is a scene that is slightly retconned from the books. The way that it plays out in the books is that right after Cersei's walk of penance, Kevin Lannister is going to meet with Pycelle and walks in to find Pycelle dead from a crossbow. Before he's ambushed by Varys, who shoots him with a crossbow as well before he leaves him to kind of like his army of little birds in order to take him out, showing that Varys still is an active play here. So they do a little bit of, they borrow a little bit of that. And I think that's also a thing of what makes a large part of this episode so satisfying, is the fact that it is borrowing from a lot of payoffs that were yet to come in the books as well, because this is the last episode that borrows anything from the books in any way, shape, or form. Everything that we get from here on out after this episode is completely original material. But so you get Maester Pycelle's assassination, which, as you see, is a result of Qyburn's little army of kids. It's kind of vicious too, but I also think it's funny where it's like, okay, so Pycelle is just gonna take an order from just this random little ragtag ruffian kid and think that he's bringing him to Tommen, like they're like that, or I'm sorry, but if Pycelle was dumb enough to fall for something like that, then he definitely deserved to be axed in that way. But yeah, it's like you can tell that Pycelle specifically is a death that has been a long time coming. It's probably a death that should have come a long time ago. They kind of just kept him around. I'm still confused as to why Cersei kept him alive, especially considering that he was just actively undermining her seemingly the minute that Tywin died. But it happens. It's a pretty gruesome death, and then it's followed shortly thereafter by the explosion. And again, just the way that it unfolds, it is visual mastery to say the least. Another little detail that I noticed as well is that so when Jaime arrives at the city near the back half of the episode, when Cersei is being crowned queen, one thing that I noticed is that when he rode up, and this has got to be so, I mean, the timing's a little bit off too, because you have the celebratory meal with the Freys, which you have to assume takes place probably around the same time or like a little bit before when the explosion happens. And then he gets back to the city right as Cersei's being crowned queen, which you have to assume happens shortly sometime after the events of the opening. And the smoke is still unfurling and bellowing from the sept upwards, just showing like, wow, yeah, this is a massive thing, because the whole thing is that the Sept of Baelor was always like a structure that rivaled the Red Keep in size and has been such a crazy huge staple of this city's history, and now it's just gone, just wiped out, reduced to atoms. And I mean, with the explosion itself, I also love too, like whether it was sparrows or just like citizens of King's Landing that just got crushed underneath that giant bell that just like crushed them before the fire consumed everything. Like, it's just visual mastery to unfold. And like I said, Cersei, it's so satisfying to watch her where she just gets all of her enemies in that one little coop. And what's crazier too is how Marjorie figures it out like 5 seconds before it goes down, tries to get everyone out, but is stopped by the sparrows and just can watch it because it's playing around with the tension all the way up until that moment where you think it's like, oh no, is Marjorie gonna get out? Up until nope, the final explosion happens. And I love how too they go out of their way to show, oh, the High Sparrow gets eviscerated first. She's like, oh yeah, he's the first one to go.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that the sparrows, have basically maintained this moral authority over everybody, and they're the sort of true translators of the gods, And I think it's one of those things when Marjorie figures it out. She's, a very intelligent person and knows how the game's played. And this is almost weird because the High Sparrow and her sort of have this understanding of like, I'll play your game and to a certain degree, and I'll maintain my status and power, but you'll also have, power as well. And the fact that, he kind of dismisses her like, hey, Cersei's not here. Cersei doesn't plan on ever suffering those consequences. So therefore, we are right where she wants us to be, and we should, kind of leave, figure this out, and then maybe come back and basically try to live another day and figure it out later. But the Sparrow wants the upper hand, so like his men are blocking everybody in, not letting people leave, and it's kind of the fatal flaw. The Sparrow cannot really let them leave, based on like Marjorie's understanding of the Game of Thrones that's being played, because the Sparrow's playing a different game. And if he were to sort of bend the knee to Marjorie, so to speak, and let her kind of like make this decision, and they were to retreat from the Sept, that would put him potentially in a diminished position, because he's following orders from her. So I think it's one of those things where before he realizes the move he made, that maybe he should have listened to her, it's too late. So
Yeah.
I like how it's sort of this poetic justice of the Sparrow. Like, he thought he had things figured out. He thought he knew exactly what he needed to do to sort of grow his influence and really direct the city in a different direction. But he didn't know how to really play the game, of Thrones, and he got taken out by Cersei's, questionable madness.
And he also, and the other unfortunate thing about that too is that he took Marjorie right with him, because Marjorie, unlike him, was still trying to play the game, was still trying to get back in after Cersei had kind of upended her and effectively kind of removed House Tyrell permanently from power. Despite the fact that she was kind of taken out with it, she had effectively done her job as far as really primarily removing the key figures of House Tyrell from the fray. And now that's all gone, as well, as Olenna states later on in her meeting with with Ilaria and the Sand Snakes, as where Cersei is effectively, even though Olenna's still alive, she's an old woman. Like, Cersei has effectively wiped out the entire future of her house. That's another thing that's kind of so spellbinding, is with one swell move. Again, it's just I cannot emphasize enough just how awesome this moment was. Just seeing, it was just a reminder almost of like, oh, so Cersei has now become the monster that everyone has always kind of known and always kind of talked up, but it was never really kind of confirmed. And this is just a visual confirmation of that. And it's all tied up with the torturing of Septa Unella when she has the confession scene where she's like, oh, it does feel good to confess under the right circumstances, kind of getting into the idea of like everything that motivates her. She's like, I only do things because they feel good. It feels good to protect our children. It feels good to have sex with my brother. It feels good, and just admit it. It felt good for you to torture me because you liked it, not because you were pious or anything like that, And it's just, oh man, there's just something so satisfying about seeing Cersei get justice, which is so crazy to think about, because this is a character that we despised for so much of our time. This is a character that it was just, at the end of the day, just doing all of the wrong things for all of the right reasons. And now that she's just been driven to this point of no return just by forces that inevitably she brought about, but there's just something so inherently satisfying about watching her finally get her just desserts and leave. And despite the fact that, we can, again, just playing into the true horror, we can only imagine what's gonna come when she leaves the mount, when she leaves Septa Unella to the mountain. Like, oh man,
Well, I think this sequence is basically right after Ramsay's gone, and now we have to really, replace that void, right? We had Joffrey, who passes the torch to Ramsay, who passes the torch to Cersei, and now this is going to be our really sadistic bad guy. And this episode is all about setting her up as sort of the last obstacle between the realm and the Night King, because just her ambition, her evil, and that's going to get in the way of all these kingdoms working together. And you really have to elevate her in this moment. So what way do you do that? You have her blow up a major part of the city. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. She effectively eliminates all her enemies. She kills all these innocent people. She does significant damage potentially to the short to medium term economics of the city. religion in the city is practically wiped out, I would imagine, or at
Yeah.
least diminished in a big way. So, she made this really huge decision to be a terrorist queen, and really lead by fear. And, ultimately, going forward with how else are we going to make her bad? Well, not only is she going to make these choices that impact a ton of people, including her people, but when it comes down to her enemies, she's going to torture them. And in this sequence, I guess there was like complaints about like the fact that she's like pouring wine and practically waterboarding her in wine. And then obviously you've mentioned it. There is this allusion to sort of like a streetcar named Desire, the film allusion to the fact that the mountain is going to really just assault her over and over and over again, for a long time before Cersei decides to finally end her life. So it's one of those things where it's really there to elevate Cersei as the main bad guy. And unlike the scene where of Ramsay sort of having a sadistic wedding night with Sansa, I don't think this one is really gratuitous. I really do think it has this purpose of showing you that Cersei has lost all her kids, and now she has literally gone crazy, and
Yeah.
to the point where revenge is something that's going to be like hell have no fury but a woman scorned, right? And it's she's willing to do anything to make sure that pain is inflicted, the
Right. I mean,
pain that's inside her, so to speak, from
absolutely.
losing
We'll
her
we'll get
kids.
into later on how kind of maybe the last two seasons kind of seek to under whether intentionally or unintentionally kind of undermine that. But at the very least, for now, it's just this officially shows it's like, yeah, Cersei's officially gone full on heel in order to continue to coin your wrestling terminology that you love to bring in so much. And yeah, it's going to be. It certainly proves that, like, yeah, they're gonna have Jon and Daenerys are gonna have a hell of a fight once once the final battle kind of begins in those last couple seasons. So
Yeah, I don't know if she's already been healed, but she basically just went
no,
like
but before it was
Super
like
Saiyan, so to
I
speak.
guess then
Let's
yeah
use
I
Dragon
guess
Ball Z.
that's the wrong term. I guess just the idea that like before it was kind of like she was one of many heels. It was her, Joffrey, Tywin, Jamie when he was still in the city. Now it's kind of just focused on her, and
Yeah,
you even see that on the look on Jamie's face when he arrives back in the city later on, where he's like you kind of have this look where it's like, okay, I knew that we were talking about winning and taking everything back from our enemies, but like, did you have to go that far?
yeah. Well, I think again the wrestling terms. I guess she did take a face turn in the storyline because she was forced to walk through the streets, with the whole shame thing. Her kids are unfortunately being murdered left and right, and so for a moment there's an opportunity for us, the audience, to feel for her in terms of what's happening, what kind of upcoming she's getting from her being so complicit in the downfall of the Starks and the rise of the Lannisters. Like she didn't necessarily make those decisions. That was Tywin. Like she was there and she did some stuff, but like clearly she didn't control Joffrey the way she was supposed to control him, or she just couldn't. Joffrey was too independently stupid for Cersei to really control. And so those things are, yeah, she was evil, but at the same time she wasn't really playing the game fully herself. She was just sort of a supporting player. And then when she started playing the game, the Sparrow got the one up on her, so she sort of became that face, someone that we, the audience, can identify with and sort of understand that she's going through certain struggles and sort of have a moment to read her as a deeper character. And then, yeah, this is ultimately, this sequence here is the super saying of evil. She's just powering up, and she's going to go full blown tilt for the rest of the
Absolutely.
series.
And it all concludes with just that great, like, the christening of the scene and that great pull-out shot of her just like, I thought it was kind of funny too, where it's like she's walking past all these lords and ladies, and I'm like, wait a minute, were those like all the same people that were just crowding in the set? How did they make it out? Like, how are there this many people here? I don't know. That's a little bit more of a nitpick, but Moving on. I did want to talk a little bit about River of the twins before we hit Winterfell and everything that goes on there, just because of just how absolutely entertaining it is from start to finish. Like they need to throw in just like one sequence in there in order to kind of tie up that arc, before the inevitable build up to Arya killing Walder Frey. And I mean, it's just hilarious, starting with Jaime and Bronn and more just back and forth. Bronn just cannot help himself with the whole just throwing insults Jaime's way about him only being into Cersei before he unintentionally kind of hits on Arya, because as we later come to find out, the servant girl that's serving them is Arya in disguise, and she's staring at Jaime for a little bit. And I wasn't quite sure why. I'm like, that's a scene that doesn't really make sense in hindsight, because if I'm not mistaken, Arya doesn't have any beef with Jaime, at least not that I think of. So that was just a little bit confusing in hindsight.
Well, I would assume that maybe she does have her eyes because he's a Lannister, and she does have sort of this hatred for all Lannisters. So it could be one of those things where if this servant is Arya at this point, right? When Bronn and Jaime are there, she could be looking at him as like, do I have an opportunity to take him out as well? Or, is there the bigger mission, which is Walder Frey and his family? And so, you could read it one of two ways at the, once you get the full arc of the storyline, is either, this servant was there and was, easily taken advantage of.
Arya,
yeah, taken advantage of by Arya because Jaime, left, right?
Right.
She was kind of like hovering around and looking to be with Jaime that evening, and so she didn't necessarily find another lord, to be with. And so therefore she was right there for the picking for Arya to come in. Or it could have been Arya and, she just didn't have the opportunity to take out Jaime, considering her overall mission was to really hurt the Freys at this point.
Right, that's fair. So that does make sense. But the biggest thing for me about this conversation that I think is just so unbelievably awesome is when Walder Frey sits next to Jaime. And I love the visual, again, just great facial acting from Nikolai Coster-Waldau, where he is just could not be more repulsed by this guy. He just absolutely despises him and hates him. I would be surprised to find if there's anybody in the Seven Kingdoms that actually enjoys being around Walder Frey. even his own sons and his own family members, I feel like don't want to be around him. But the biggest thing is when Walder
Frey is a great character, and it's played so well. Just like I don't even know how to describe it.
I feel like the more repulsive the character is, the more you enjoy them. Him, Joffrey, Robin, Aaron, all of just the characters that are just so beyond despicable. You're just like, it's just so great of a character. But the biggest thing for me is when he dares to drop the Kingslayer line. It's like, look at us, both Kingslayers. They both laugh at us. They both mock us. And you can just see the look just drain out of Jaime's face, because you can tell that it's like, man, it's a good thing that Arya kills him later on, because I'm surprised that Jaime didn't pull out a knife and stab right there. Just like the audacity that he has to compare that ultimately like spineless act of murdering Robb Stark and everyone at the Red Wedding versus what, as we came to find out, ironically enough, in that same season, that Jaime's act of kingslaying was an act of heroism, where he was saving that entire city from being destroyed, thousands upon thousands of innocent people from being destroyed. And of course, again, nobody knows this, but the fact that Walder Frey, a man who already is repulsive enough to begin with, dares to compare himself to Jaime in that sense, which leads Jaime to drop that gem of a one-liner, which is like, they don't fear the Freys, they fear the Lannisters. And if we have to come out and bail you guys out every single time, you had one job to keep Riverrun and you couldn't even do that, why exactly do we need you? Just dropping the mic before he just walks off, before Frey insults him anymore. Which I still think it's hilarious, where it's like Frey thinks that he could like potentially like, throw out jabs at Jaime, and it's like, okay, you're 90 plus years old. Jaime, despite only having one hand, is still, was the best swordsman in the Seven Kingdoms. He could easily pull out a knife and just jab you right here. Like, what? I don't get it. He's just flexing to flex, and it just makes his death even more satisfying. Again, this is another death that has just been so long, just such a long time coming. A sequence, it's so well built too. It's another sequence that's pulled directly from the books, which is the whole infamous, murdering and feeding of the Freys to, murdering of the Freys and baking them into the pie that was actually carried out at the Manderley's castle in A Dance with Dragons, as opposed to being done and committed by Arya. Famously, in the book, this was adapted where the Manderleys carried this out as a revenge plot against the Freys. In order to continue to consistently undermine them as well, which also led to a conflict with Ramsay, to a micro conflict with Ramsay as well, which also caused a commotion that allowed for Theon, which actually was the commotion that allowed for Theon and Jane Poole to escape in the books, as opposed to it being the battle with Stannis. But it's a scene that's pulled directly from the books. It's so it's brutal and merciless the way that it's built up to. I just love the way that, you know, the servant girl says that it's like, oh, but they're here, you my lord. You know, look closely before she folds back the pie and shows the finger in there. It's so
Yeah,
good.
this was totally Scott Tetterman in the chili from South Park. I just, you know, to me, you know, it's a moment where you're bursting out laughing because you know, either you've seen that, you know, classic episode of South Park, or you haven't. But the main thing is, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, for me, yeah, it's sadistic, and it's not, you know, it's I don't even know what to say. It is a method of revenge. It is kind of grotesque, but ultimately, to me, because of that particular episode with Eric Cartman, it has become just like really hilarious type of thing to do in any work of fiction. So it's kind of like just to see him react and be like, "There's the thumb," or whatever finger it was, and you know, just to realize that something's wrong here, and then to have Arya kind of be like, you know, "Hey, I just want you to know that the last thing you'll ever see is a Stark smiling down at you,"
Yeah.
and that's when the big moment happens, and Frey is has moments to live as you know, the life flees from his you know, beady eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like I said, it's just I can only say the word satisfying so many times because, like I said, this episode is just so chock full of them. And even though it's a little bit disturbing seeing Arya's reaction, just the fact that, like, again, she is finally carrying out the revenge against all the people that screwed over her family, you know, and as if to add insult to injury, that wasn't already crazy enough seeing Arya pull that up. But then we get the cold open sequence in the premiere of next episode, which we'll cover that when we get to that one, where it's like, oh,
Yeah,
not
for
only does
sure.
she have to kill Walder Frey, she has to wipe out every single Frey, the good and the innocent, just completely off the table, you know, just completely eviscerate that entire
Yeah,
family.
to me, I think this sequence kind of comes out of nowhere with Arya popping up. You know, we uh, always, this is the episode to talk about you know, magic teleporting around the world here. Arya really comes in really quick to have this little murder spree happen. So you know, I think you're not giving the audience enough time to breathe. Like, this is definitely a scene that kind of comes out of nowhere. It seems like it happens rather quick, and you know, it's one of those things where I think they could have gave us to the start of next season to really have Arya come back to Westeros. Like, give us a whole season off before
Right.
bringing her back after the no one episode. But
Right.
you know, I get it. You know, it's one of those things where you know, I guess they just wanted us to have this scene. I feel like it's out of place. I don't know. You tell
That's fair.
me.
I
Do
mean,
you
it
feel
I
that
feel
it
like it's one of
really
those
needed
things
here?
where you can have it one way where you can have the Arya sequence in this episode, but then I think it kind of undercuts the next episode, you know, or you can have it in the next episode, but not in this episode. But I feel like it's the having it in both episodes is what kind of undercuts it, you know, where you almost could have. Also, I still find the logistics of Arya posing as Walder Frey just hilarious. Where it's like, what does she have to pretend like she's standing on that chair the entire time in order to pretend that she's as tall as him? Because she's not, you know, Maisie Williams is pretty short. She's not nearly as tall as David Bradley, you know. So just some of the logistics there are hilarious. But I think it's one of those things where it's like one is good, the other is good, but two is like a little bit too much. So I think I understand where you're coming from there. Now let's cut to Winterfell. Let's hit it here. Oh man, just every moment in this castle, just, and again, gem top to bottom, starting with the Davos confrontation with Melisandre as he's kind of like reminiscing and telling her about his childhood, you know, for when they were kids and all that, you know, and how he kind of, you know, it's so great. It's this entire episode as just being a cap of Jon's arc from starting as a mere bastard all the way back in the premiere of Winterfell, all the way to now being crowned king of the North in this episode. It's like it makes me realize even more in hindsight that why they kind of like had to tear Jon down so much, because they'd already pretty much elevated him to as high as they were going to get, you know, with him being crowned king of the North. And that's even before the whole Aegon Targaryen reveal, which we also get in this episode as well, which is another thing to just cap off the episode as well. And then, of course, you have Davos storming in. You know, it was set up in the last episode with him finding the stag, and he walks in, and we as the audience, we all know what's about to happen, where he chucks the stag to Melisandre, and he kind of reveals it again. Like Davos and Melisandre's relationship has always kind of been like, this really interesting source of tension
Yeah.
and drama, and it all comes to a head here. And it's just, again, I think this is the best acting from Liam Cunningham in the entire show, where he just lets out all of his like hatred and frustration that he's had with Melisandre as a character throughout the entire time, from wanting to initially kill her, to being forced to work with her, to them kind of sort of being allied, on Stannis' side again in season 5, to, the slow, to them like kind of both switching sides over to Jon and him convincing her to bring Jon back, and him kind of like provoking her, to now seeing that it's like, she's back to her usual tricks, and this time it's resulted in the death of someone that was very near and dear to his heart. He's finally gotten that confirmation.
Well, she's not back to the original tricks, but she did something terribly devious, right?
Right.
Something that she hid from Davos that she knew he wouldn't approve of. And here's the thing: is like she goes, "Oh, we all know, that I have a part to play in the war ahead." And what is that? Just setting a couple swords on fire? Like literally, I don't know if she does much for the rest of the series at all. And so it just it's really bizarre. They let her go. They let her ride south. If you ever come back to the north, we'll hang you. And it's one of those things where Melisandre goes on some sort of adventure for a season. She only comes back when it's time for the long night.
Right, exactly. And I still don't know if they let Melisandre off too easily there, as far as like why Jon let her go. She's like, you're going to need me for the fight with the Long Night. It's like, I don't necessarily know if there's a lot of truth to that, especially considering that, just the logistics of how she shows up for the Long Night and what she actually contributes to it. I think it definitely would have been something really, really interesting here, where if after, the whole instance where she kind of needed to be coaxed back into the fray after losing faith in the premiere, which was again modeled, around her character. It was even named after her. And now, I think it would have been really interesting if they executed her in this episode, and kind of held her accountable for her crimes. I think that would have been really interesting and something really like kind of different and unexpected, especially, giving Davos kind of the much needed closure around, and really, I think tying off the Stannis arc in a really interesting design here. But they let her go, and this only to set up for the Long Night after the fact. Then you have the Jon rightfully calling out Sansa on the parapets of Winterfell, being like, yeah, you called in the Knights of the Vale and they saved us, but we need to trust each other. It's like this whole going behind my back thing. This cannot keep happening. Like we have so many enemies. We've made our stance known. That the Starks have reclaimed Winterfell. We're going to have enemies going forward. We need to be sure that we can rely on each other. And as we see in the next scene with Sansa and Littlefinger, we clearly know that that's not what Sansa's going to do, So I don't know. Like, what was really your take on that?
One of the things is, like, I really love the scene and how it played out on top of the ramparts, because for the most part, Sansa is really saying to him, like, that she's new to this and that she, made a mistake. And this is what I was talking about last week, is the fact that, they should have played that up more, that, she really didn't know, if she should have brought it up, because, she's doesn't really know if Littlefinger would have came, to save them, or if he would have sort of, bent to his own self-interest. So we get a little bit of that storyline here in the episode, where Sansa says, I kind of should have told you, but like, obviously she wasn't sure that it was going to mean anything. And, going from my point of view is like, if you tell Jon, like, hey, the Knights of the Vale could be coming, and they plan around that, then they could be planning around something that doesn't happen, and they could have definitely lost the battle, even worse than they were losing it when the Vale showed up. And then the other scene we get here is Littlefinger, like, clearly Sansa and Jon don't trust him, but he kind of goes up to Sansa and expresses his vision, like. And this is the thing that we said was kind of missing from the later seasons of Peter Baelish, is what is his end game and what's his vision.
Right.
And here they have a scene like right on the nose, like, it's me on the throne with you by my side, Sansa. Like he's some sort of a creepy guy that's been grooming her since King's Landing to be his queen. You know, and he puts it all. That's the cards on the table. Like he's really telling Sansa, take it or leave it, and I think he's
Right.
putting his fate in her hands. You know, based on this scene that I'm seeing here in this episode, and we'll see, you know, how it plays out. Like this is the third time that I'm going through the series, so like I know how it plays out. But you know, it's one of those things where you know he's taking a giant leap of faith here, and what I'm surprised about is that this is not a bigger deal than it should be for Peter Baelish because this is something that's usually outside his comfort zone, entrusting his life to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's whether you can still buy into Littlefinger at this point, especially considering that it's like, oh, so we're now all of a sudden we're now all of a sudden expected to believe that this was his grand master plan to have Sansa back in the seat of Winterfell, especially considering just kind of some of the really moronic moves that he made. I mean, could you make the argument that yeah, he always saw her back in charge of and command of Winterfell, regardless of the circumstances that led to that? Sure, I guess, but like I said, it leads it, as I've said over the last couple of episodes, it's too many hoops to jump through. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense as to why he would have carried out those actions. And so
Yeah,
kind of
but
when he
it's one of those things where it's like we've you know hit this horse numerous times, so to speak. You know, it's Lord Baelish knows his people, right? And he had
right.
to know that Ramsay Bolton was, you know, one of the worst torturers of the land, and yet he sort of still gives Sansa to him as a gift. And so, if his long term plan was to get the Iron Throne and sit, you know, have Sansa as his queen beside him, how does like traumatizing her for the rest of her life really cement that relationship? Like,
Right.
you know, he sort of you know facilitated that from happen or facilitated that happening. So of course she's gonna hate him and resent him and never really trust him again. Yep, that was sort of what seems to be a
Especially
key component
considering
of his
that the
plan.
minute that he starts trying to play game behind her back the next season, she immediately and she almost falls for it, but she immediately is able to figure it out and then has him killed as a result of it. I don't know. Like I said, Littlefinger has already been lost as a character for me, and we only have one more
No,
season to spend with
I
him.
think they transitioned to like, you know, there was a core cast of characters in the early season, and then you know, some of those characters sort of became more secondary than they were in the past, and Littlefinger is definitely one of those characters. I think, you know, just played by a great actor. It was a great character in the first four seasons, and then it's just greatly diminished towards the end. Still pretty, you know, still played really well. Still, you know, it's just he's used more in a plot device style way than in a, you know, hey, like this is a great character. Let's, you know, make some awesome scenes with him in it.
Yeah.
So it's really he just serves the plot at this point.
Yeah, I want to talk about these next two scenes in conjunction because they kind of tie up, you know, both Bran beyond the wall as well as the final shot in Winterfell of Jon being crowned king in the north, because I feel like the match cut that happens here from the slide down to baby Jon, obviously in the dying Lyanna Stark's arms, cutting to Jon sitting at the head of the table right as he's about to be crowned king in the north, I think might be a match cut for the ages. I'm not going to quite say it's 2001 A Space Odyssey level match cut quality, but it's damn close to it, where you have Bran beyond the wall having just been dropped off there by Benjen. How they been able to avoid the White Walkers up to that point, I don't know. I'm assuming that's just some magic that Benjen's got on his side where he's able to avoid them. He
Yeah,
drops them off
they
in a
got
weird tree.
horsepower down.
Exactly. They finally have a horse. That's what makes the difference. You know, instead of them just pulling Bran over on his sled, he drops him off right by the wall, conveniently right by a weird tree where he's like, you know, you still have learning to do. Bran's kind of got to finish downloading in all the information from the universe. You know, I always think of Bran as like a USB that you just plug into like the mainframe that is the, you know, the massive server space that is the universe. You know, kind of like that little Black Mirror episode, you know, where they transfer their consciousness and put them on those little discs and then plug them into the mainframe. So they
Yeah,
can
I
kind of
haven't seen Black Mirror. I know it's a good show, and I'll probably watch it one day.
I feel
But
like that's a show that you would have watched like immediately. That show has
yeah,
memes
no,
all
no,
over it.
I knew about it way before it was on the U.S. Interwebs.
Right.
You know, and I was going to, you know, get access to a copy and watch it. But then when it appeared on Netflix, I totally just like, oh, this is mainstream now, and then I just haven't gotten to it. So it's one of those things where it's on my list of things to get to, but because I guess it went mainstream, I just totally never got into it.
Yeah.
What this reminds me of is I've been watching a couple of episodes of Fringe on the side, right?
Ooh, good show.
Don't tell anybody I'm cheating on Game of Thrones, but
Oh no.
I'm paying attention to Fringe. I'm doing a rewatch of that, and there's a moment in one of the episodes where something, a signal is coming through the computer and sort of reaching out through the screen, and it's killing people, and it happens to be a 650 megabyte download. And I think one of the lines of dialogue is like, "Oh my god, a massive 650 megabytes is coming in," and it's
Yeah.
just to imagine, where Fringe was in like 2008 or 9 or something like that, and to imagine how much data is now uploaded and downloaded on the internet
Oh, it's
is
ridiculous.
amazing. Um, so yeah. So just I imagine that Bran is just downloading the 650
Right.
megabytes from the universe.
But the other thing that I was thinking of too is that I was just thinking about like when he kind of like had to be forcefully unplugged from the tree, like when the White Walkers were initially attacking a couple episodes ago, and then when they replug him in, I almost keep thinking of like that scene with like you remember in Avengers: Age of Ultron where Ultron was trying to transfer his conscious into the Vision's body, but they kept having to like start and stop because the Avengers were attacking him at the same time. I was kind of getting similar vibes to that in this movie as well, which I mean, if you want to talk about like kind of Marvel seeping into it, even infecting Game of Thrones, I mean, the signs are right here. But I just thought that was kind of funny. It kind of reminded me of that. But obviously, the big moment that comes from there, it's a thing that fans had theorized about for years, going all the way back to when a Game of Thrones was released back in 1996. And they finally, this is the official confirmation of it. There had been rumors that it was going to be officially revealed in this season, but it is finally confirmed that the true cause of Lyanna Stark's death when Ned finds her in the Tower of Joy is revealed because she did indeed give birth to Jon, or the baby that was born, Aegon Targaryen, or whatever it was that she named him originally, and that she was indeed, with Rhaegar, and Jon is indeed Rhaegar and Lyanna's child as well. It was a huge moment of revelation. At the time, it was it was very confirming. It was what a lot of fans had theorized. It was a game changer at the time. Again, like so many other things that happened in the last 2 seasons, what did it actually amount to? But at the time, it was an absolute game changer. And again, the way that it match cuts to Jon sitting in the hall, surrounded by all the Northern Lords, as kind of having inherited this position as a king, even though he's not technically king of the Seven Kingdoms. It's like it's brilliantly told visually, I think. And then it's followed by Lyanna Mormont just telling like everyone what's what, basically just call this like, yeah, you didn't show up, you didn't show up, you didn't show up, and you guys are what now just expected to be like fully received, It's like you think that this guy is just joking around. Nah, you better listen to this guy when he's telling you what's what, as Jon is trying to warn them about the coming war with the White Walkers, as Lord Kerwin stands up and tries to say, oh, winter is here. We should try, we should return to our homes. Because that's the other big thing that's established by this episode as well, as is in the title, The Winds of Winter. Obviously, once we see Sam arriving at the Citadel, that's another thing, too, that I like about this episode. Everything is kind of connected, where you see the White Ravens departing because, as you know, whenever the changing of the seasons comes, the Citadels always sends out ravens in order to signify it, where the White Raven finally arrives to signify the winter, as Ned Stark has been saying for years, has indeed finally come. And as well, kind of coinciding with the symbolic march of the White Walkers as well. And it leads to all the Northern Lords pulling out their swords, declaring their loyalty for Jon, and crowning him the king in the North. It's still, to me, like, I think this is even more satisfying than Robb being crowned king of the North way back in season 1, because again, it's Jon's come full circle moment. Again, he has ultimately started at the bottom, bastard of Winterfell, to member of the Night's Watch, to fighting beyond the wall and holding their own against the wildlings, to becoming Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, then forging this alliance between the wildlings for the first time in over hundreds of thousands of years, to having died and been brought back to life, and now has inherited this position as king of the North. I mean,
yeah, I think it's really brilliant, in terms of storytelling, because, you have Robb, who raises the North, against the South after Ned Stark is gone, and they dub him the King of the North, and he has successful victories, and he's doing a pretty good job, but he just gets outsmarted by Tywin, and he gets killed and murdered, and you know, it establishes for us early on, the audience, that hey, you know, it's like it's a hard thing to be the king of the north, to unite all these tribes, to then fight wars, you know, and the rest of the series happens. Like the Starks pretty much have fallen apart. They're wandering the world. They're being terrorized, whether it be by the Night King or by Ramsay Bolton, or by, you know, the Waif, and maybe some questionable theater in you know, low wage jobs like selling clams by the seashore. But the main thing is, you know, for us to come back, have the Battle of the Bastards, to see what Jon has done, you know, come back, basically from death, from being betrayed by the Night's Watch, to, you know, basically teaming up with the Wildlings, you know, and really Sansa coming in and bringing the Knights of the Vale, and sort of like really going through some hardship to basically earn that moment where everyone's calling him the King of the North. Like, he's basically has proven himself as a commander and a leader. I've said this the whole entire podcast, is it's interesting to see all the mentors that he's had throughout this. You know, Ned Stark, you know, Commander Mormont, you know, obviously the Maester at you know, the Black, you know, keep, you know, it's like he learned from Craster, of all people, even though Craster was kind of an evil guy. You know, it's like Mance, like what's his name, Corwin,
Mance,
the guy.
Stannis, Corin Halfhand.
Yeah,
Oh,
Corwin
again,
Halfhand.
he's had
Like
the
there's
best
so
teachers.
many strong leaders, and, you know, and people of like, you know, a generation above John that kind of like mentor him on his quest. That finally, when we get this moment, you know, King of the North, King of the North, King of the North, we get this sense like, you know what, you know, this guy has been to hell and back, and he can take on someone like Cersei. And
Yeah.
I think this is like they got to the moment they needed to get to, whether or not we agree that there was some questionable writing starting from season 5.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's one more earned moment on top of a bunch of other earned moments that happened this season. Only a couple more brief moments that we want to hit before we clear this episode out. Dorne, obviously, you know, we get it back this episode, but it's all made better because they just stick Olenna in there as the audience avatar in order to just insult the ever loving crap out of the sand snakes, and it's just hilarious and amazing the way that it happens, where she's like, what is your name again? To Obara. And then she's like, you look like an ugly little boy. Don't presume to tell me my business. And then she insults, what's it called, Nymeria, and then doesn't even give Tyene a chance to speak before she's like, good, the adults are talking. It's just another hilarious scene as her and Ilaria are kind of shoring up their alliance before Varys inexplicably magically walks out of the blue and says, you know, the words fire and blood again. I don't have a problem with this scene. This scene I think, is actually really good. I think it accomplishes everything it needs to in the very short amount of time. It shows that the last remaining of the Tyrells and the Martells that are now both on the outs with the crown, with the Lannisters, where else they
Well,
have to
Dom,
turn.
I know what you're alluding to. The teleporting
The
Varys.
teleport.
Like,
But I'm saving that. I'm saving that for when we get to Daenerys, though. I'm just talking about, like, for
listen,
the moment. For this sequence, it's fine.
yeah, no, this scene by itself is perfect. And if this was the only scene that Varys was in this episode, it would be perfectly fine. It's like the way it needs to be. You know, it basically shows that they're teaming up with Daenerys, and that's enough said. You don't need to show Varys for the rest of the episode. You know, I think this is again, this is one of those potent, really direct scenes. You know, it gets straight to the point. You know, it gives Olenna some comedy that kind of, you know, it's well crafted around her, and it gives us like the setup for what could be a deadly alliance against Cersei.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be, again, like I've said about so many other things, if not for the last two seasons, at the very least for what we see right now, this is setting up for something really cool, because it shows that kind of all the other powers that are left in Westeros or have kind of shored up their alliances. Like the Riverlands are unfortunately still with the Lannisters for as long as that will last. Unfortunately, however, when they're taken out by Arya, the Arryns officially under control of Littlefinger have teamed up with the Starks, and that leaves the remaining three powers: the Greyjoys, the Tyrells, and the Martells. Have obviously now teamed up with Daenerys again. The Baratheons have effectively been wiped out; they're no longer players, at least not until Daenerys legitimizes Gendry. Only other sequence that we have left to cover is Sam arriving at the Citadel. This is fine. It's a quick cutesy scene just in order to it's some quick exposition. It's some good visual storytelling just in order to wrap it up. I mean, there's really not much that I can say here other than okay, Sam sees the library and they get to show off some of the cool CGI that they put in place in order to demonstrate the Citadel.
Yeah, I think that's really the only thing. There's not much to say about it.
Right.
Like Sam and Gilly have finally got to this strange place. And clearly they introduced that there's going to be a little bit of a hang up because Mormont, is still listed as the commander, and here's Sam saying like life happens,
Right?
Like you got to accept.
Like, really, we had no idea.
Yeah, it's like I'm here to be the new Maester, and apparently no one followed the protocol, probably because Mormont got betrayed above the wall, and no one knew to follow the protocol.
Right.
Also, I guess what's his face? Why do I keep forgetting his name? The Maester at the wall.
Aemon.
Aemon. Yeah, it's like, oh man, he has that great death sequence, and I just like, forget his name from that point on. So yeah, Aemon didn't follow protocol either. So
right.
Here it is. Like you're setting it up. Sam is gonna have to do some questionable stuff to get his
he's got a couple things. Again, he's not following all the direct protocols. I still I think it's a little bit confusing where the Maester that's sitting there is like, oh, it's this is most irregular, and she's like, oh, no women and children are allowed into the Citadel. Then like the next episode you see that like, okay, they're living with Sam, their little apartment in Old Town. I'm not quite sure about the logistics of there, but again, it's like I know a lot of people like the visual imagery of the Citadel, considering that Sam has finally found his way. If he's finally found a home, he's finally someplace that he can accept it. But again, like that's really
at this point, it's like Harry Potter in the Game of Thrones.
Pretty
world.
much,
Let's face it.
Yeah, that's almost exactly what it is. But let's wrap this episode up. Let's wrap this season up with Meereen. Obviously, again, Daenerys, she's shoring up her allies. As she says, she's finally getting ready to leave Essos, finally getting ready to bring the damage to to Westeros. She's got the Greyjoy fleet. She's got her own fleet. She's got the power of the Tyrells and the Martells. She's got the Unsullied. She's got the Dothraki. She's got everything. And so naturally, what does she do? She leaves another one of her people, the Second Sons, behind because of Tyrion's suggestion that she should not come to Westeros with a suitor. And in hindsight, Pat, did this make a lick of difference, or was this just another like poor excuse of them to kind of write Daario off the show because they weren't really going to have anything for him to do going forward?
Well, listen, I think the main reason why this took place is because we just spent an entire 2 seasons of Daenerys and company trying to secure Meereen and the surrounding former slave cities. And now she's just going to up and leave. And
still a waste of time if you ask me.
Yeah,
but.
she totally destroyed their economy and decided to implement something half-assed. And then she was just going to leave.
Like that.
So, well, no, that's pretty much what it would have been. But obviously she's, doing her due diligence. She's killing 2 birds with 1 stone. She's leaving these cities in Daario's capable hands, alongside other advisors and council members. And, obviously solving the problem of having this lover that, she's not necessarily going to have time for in that way, and it's also going to be could be a distraction. So Tyrion is sort of, making this suggestion that it's like, leave him behind because he's a capable leader, but also because, it's sort of a loose end that you don't need when you're about to play the Game of Thrones. And listen, in this show, there's so much evidence of, characters refusing to play the game, and they end up dead. And so this is another case where Tyrion is saying, you're playing the game, you're about to step into the door. You got to leave this guy behind. And she does, she trusts that instinct. And so at this point, we're getting the sense that she's a sensible leader. She's about to enter this game, doing what she needs to do, keeping her mind clear. And I think that sets her up as the third big threat. She has the dragons, she has the armies. She may not have the well-written stories across the past 6 seasons to back it up, but she has all the other might
Right.
to come
Exactly.
into Westeros and basically be a big player.
Exactly. And like I said, with that being said, after, she makes Tyrion her new hand. And well, I still don't know if he did a good enough job as far as earning that, considering that Meereen was in almost complete shambles under his control until she kind of came in with the dragons and saved everybody. It's kind of a heartwarming moment, in the
What a
moment.
weird scene, though. It's like,
So weird. Like I
I
liked it for the
believe,
first one.
I believe, sir, this is what the custom is. You're my hand. It's like,
And he's
oh
like,
my
"Oh well,
god, just
you have completely failed to to motivate me." I also thought it was a little bit disturbing where it's like, I just said goodbye to a man who I know loves me, but I didn't even feel anything. I just kind of just needed to get it over with, and I'm like, "What?" Like, okay, we're just gonna dance over that point right there. Again, like just little moments, little brief moments that are still in there in order to kind of show the descent into madness. But at the very least, it resulted again a shot that is a little bit confusing visually because again, we talked about this before, the teleportation hopping with Varys, where he leaves Meereen to go to Dorne in order to recruit them, and then sails back to Meereen, only to sail with them to Westeros shortly thereafter. There's clearly a lot of time that was left out on the cutting room floor, but just it's one of those things where, as an audience member, you just have to ask it logistically. You're like, wouldn't it make more sense for Varys to come with the Tyrells and the Martells and just meet them all at Dragon? So when they get there, like he knows where she's going. It's not like she's like hit a detour or anything like that.
well, I think the way the episode should have been is like, King of the North, King of the North, King of the North, and then fade the black, and then like, basically show us like weeks later, and then we're back in
Right.
Marine, and that would give Varys the opportunity to go. Like, if they just threw a nice little lower third telling you that time has passed, it wouldn't be crazy that Varys kind of came back personally. You know, maybe even Varys kind of shows up. Maybe they show Varys getting off the boat and going into the throne room and sort of like sneaking into the chamber and hearing the conversation between, Dario and Daenerys. Um, and, maybe he's like, oh, smart move, blah, 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 blah. And Tyrion walks out and says, yeah, it was my idea. Like, they could have played with that and they could have brought him, seemingly back after showing us a nice visual time. But no, he just teleports
Right.
for no reason.
Because that's what he's been doing. He's been teleporting since minute one, and now it's just full on confirmation that he is just
Yeah,
teleporting
I'm,
everywhere.
I'm fine with him traveling.
Right.
But
The
it's
constant
just,
teleportation that kind of is a little bit annoying.
yeah, it's just, we don't, it's almost like this is a day later from when he just got done talking with Dorne
Right.
now in Highgarden. So like, it just seems a little like he's not needed in the end. They should have reshot that sequence, or if they could have like masked him out digitally somehow,
Yeah.
it would have just been so much better.
But also, I'll say this though: it ends with probably the ending shot to end all ending shots. I don't think that there's been a single ending shot of any of this. I mean, look, I'll say this: that the ending shots of pretty much every season, I feel like the only one that they usually do a pretty good job with the ending shots of every season. But I think this one might top them all. Obviously, from the dragons being born at the end of and crying at the end of season 1 to the marching of the dead on the Night's Watch on the Fist of the First Men at the end of season 2 to Daenerys being lifted up in the air by the freed slaves outside of Yunkai at the end of season 3 to Arya sailing away to Bravos at the end of season 4 to last season, obviously, with the shot of the circling in on Jon's dead body. But this one, I think, tops them all with the CG shot of the massive fleet, circling around all the different people on all the different ships, all the way to Daenerys with the dragons flying overhead. It's just, it's one of those just like, yeah, moments that you just are pumping your fist in the air for. It sets all the stakes. Cersei's in charge of King's Landing. Jon is securing positions in the north, and Daenerys is coming for them all. And it is setting us up for, at the time, a banging final 13 episodes as they officially slated. Benioff and Weiss famously stated that they were going to do the last 2 seasons in 2 parts, that even though it was going to be 13 episodes, they were going to split it into 2 parts of 7 and 6, that they were not going to do it as a 7-part 1, 7-part 2, which HBO has done famously before. They did that with the last season of The Sopranos. They famously said that it was going to be 7 and 8. So before we wrap up season 6 and before we get into season 7, the final 13, which we will be hitting obviously next week, at the time that this episode premieres, Pat, do you think it would have made any difference if they had actually just released it all as one batch of 13 as opposed to kind of the 7 and 6 that they did?
Yeah, I totally do. I think these are the next 13 episodes are very bingeable, and if you watch them as sort of just one whole, I think it's really good. But like obviously, if they had shot and edited them as one cohesive thing, it just would have, I think, potentially flowed a lot better, because we would be getting the awesome parts of season 7 with the concluding parts of season 8. There's a lot of cool scenes, but ultimately I think interweaving the two, quite possibly could have led for a more consistent ending to the show.
Yeah, I agree 100%. But with that being said, like I said, that is it for season 6. Arguably, as many people say, the best season of the show, the biggest season of the show, the moment where the show peaked. Will it have actually peaked? We'll be the ones to determine as we hit the final 13 episodes of Talking Thrones. I still can't believe that we're this close to the ending. But like I said, we're not done yet. We're this close to being done, but we're not quite done yet as we continue to cover the show all the way up until that much coveted, the Iron Throne. Pat, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, I'm posting stuff on Instagram at Patrick W. Huber, and I'll do it some days. I won't do it in others. You just have to keep checking and seeing what I post.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talking TV podcast across all social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Most importantly, be sure to subscribe if you're listening to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitch if you're not already listening to us there. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.